Straight Edges. Chapter 7, God is Love. In the last two chapters, we talked about our innate need to find out why, and about trying to learn what we could learn from the evidence all around us about this being who created us, and maybe about why we were created. So let's go there. I think from looking at nature, some characteristics of the one who started it all off come into focus pretty quickly. First, from the amazing complexity and design in the universe, intelligence. Incredible intelligence, amazing intelligence, the kind that we could deduce knows everything there is to know. And power. Incredible, amazing power, the kind that can do anything it wants to do, as one author wrote. One cause can have many effects, however, no effect can be quantitatively greater than or qualitatively superior to its cause. When this principle is applied to the origins of the universe, we discover the following. 1. The first cause of limitless space must be infinite. 2. The first cause of endless time must be eternal. 3. The first cause of boundless energy must be omnipotent. 4. The first cause of infinite complexity must be omniscient. 5. The first cause of life must be living. Frederick C. Chpt, Evolution, Guilty as Charged. Destiny Image, 1993, page 95. So it looks very much to me like God is infinite, or all big, eternal, or all living, omnipotent, or all powerful, omniscient, or all knowing, and omnipresent, all encompassing. But what else can we learn from nature? What is the nature of nature? Is it benevolent or malevolent? I mean, from our point of view, does it like us or not? Is it on our side? Or the opposite? We see both sides of nature, benevolence and malevolence, but what do we see by and large? We could spend a long time talking about all the order and precision and all those things we talked about last chapter that seem directly aimed at ensuring the survival of life. Things like how the Earth is just the right distance from the Sun and how the Earth's gravitational pull and magnetic field are just right to make life possible, and how our atmosphere is just the right blend for our needs, and about all those delicate ecosystems that keep life going and how all life seems equipped with some gift of defense or instinct to ensure the survival of its kind, and all the rest. We could go on and on. Our survival seems very important to nature, which strikes me as a great mystery. At least it must be a great mystery if nature is all there is. Why nature would equip life with all these tools for survival is a riddle with no answer. Natural selection proposes to answer it, but natural selection can only tell us that because of the drive to survive, the fittest will most likely be the ones to survive. It can't tell us why anything should survive. And the drive to survive could be seen as one more instance of benevolence rather than evidence for a pure blind chance origin of nature. Why should the drive to survive exist? Nature, meaning pure blind chance, could care less if all life were wiped out tomorrow. If there is no benevolent power at work in the universe, it seems to me to be infinitely more likely that there would be no life at all. To me, the existence and survival of life makes it look as though some benevolent power has a deep investment in life. That's one direction we could approach this question of benevolence or malevolence from, but I'd like to approach the question from a more introspective, closer-up perspective. In the beautiful place where I live right now, the year's at the spring. Today I spent the better part of the day with a book in my hands, lying on my back in the grass, watching the clouds amble by, or lying on my tummy, watching a friendly and curious ant climb up one blade of grass and down another, or scurry across the pages of my book. Birds swooped and dived overhead. A fine yellowish-green sheen of baby leaves covered the grove of trees across the way. Everything was bursting at the seams with new life. It seemed to me today that everything around me was singing for joy. At times like this, it's hard not to agree with Pippa that all's right with the world. I get the same feeling lying in bed on a summer's night, listening to the crickets soothe me to sleep under the moon with his laughing face, or maybe looking across to the mountains with a haze hanging over them on an autumn day, or maybe waking up on a snowy one, especially the first one of the year, to a clean new world. I'm starting off with the beauties of nature and their effect on me to paint pictures in your mind of whatever you happen to feel the same way about. But wait a minute, what on earth? Did you notice the things I was rhapsodizing and how extremely odd it is that I should love those things? I mean, an insect crawling up and down blades of grass. He was neither friendly nor curious, he was merely hungry and in search of food. Materialistic little beggar. What's to love about an ant? Clouds, merely visible accumulations of moisture in the atmosphere. Big deal. Crickets, insects rubbing their hind legs together, or whatever it is they rub together, to produce sound. The moon with his laughing face, nothing but a lump of cold, hard rock that reflects the sun's light, and the face we see nothing but rock and crater formations. Mountains, same thing, lumps of rock, and the haze hanging over them, nothing but pollutants in the air from some farmer burning the stubble in his fields. Snow? Well, after all, who could love snow for its own sake, especially after shoveling the stuff? I've looked at snow from both sides now. Do I really mean that I love the things I say I love? No, generally not. It's not the things themselves that I love. Even if you don't love the same things I love, you can likely identify yours may not be caused by insects with noisy legs or lumps of rock or H2O in frozen flake form, but we all have aesthetic experiences. What natural beauties do you love? White beaches, turquoise waters, sunsets? But do we really mean that we love huge collections of grains of sand or large amounts of H2O or the turning of the earth? No, what we love is the feeling they convey to our minds. And here we find this sort of fitting together of mysterious phenomena that looks very much like gift. On the one hand, the realities of our natural order, and on the other hand, a capacity in our senses to experience them, and our brains to appreciate them and idealize them. But why should we get those feelings? It's exactly as though things were created to be enjoyed, and our brains were created in such a way so that we could enjoy them. We're talking here about pleasure of a certain kind, but any kind of pleasure would do just as well to talk about. Why should pleasure exist? Why should our natural world, after it's filtered through our senses and our minds, be so chock full of it? Why should our minds be built in such a way that they're capable of pleasure? Pleasure often seems to happen in conjunction with things that are necessary for the survival of life. Take procreation, for instance. Enough said there. Or how about our need for nourishment and body fuel? On the one hand, we need a certain number of calories. On the other hand, we have taste buds and just generally enjoy putting the necessary and too often unnecessary calories into our systems. How about quenching our thirst with a long cold drink? How about sleep? For those of us past our teen years, that is. How about a warm fire on a freezing night? Everything necessary for our survival carries with it its own particular pleasure, except in our world, red tape, income tax, and the 40-hour work week, though some even manage to find the last pleasurable. We could make the argument that evolution thought up pleasure as a means of ensuring that we would do all the things we need to do to survive as a species. I would argue that there's a redundancy here, as apparently evolution had already thought up the drive to survive as a means of ensuring we would do what we needed to survive. Pure instinct seems to keep most species doing what they need to do. We find ourselves doing things that contain no pleasure, like taxes and 40-hour work weeks, because of the drive to survive. And may I refer you to microbes? I don't imagine bacteria, amoebas, or any protozoa experience a great deal of pleasure in their little lives. Yet these life forms would have to be voted least likely to go extinct if anyone would. There's the amoeba in his pleasureless existence, swimming around happy as a clam, who I don't imagine experiences much pleasure either, just to be alive. But amoebas will live on, happy or not. Nature had zero need to think up pleasure just to ensure the continuance of life. And again, it's awfully thoughtful of nature to be so doggone concerned about our survival in the first place. Pleasure is a non-essential, but it sure is a nice bonus. Or we could look at it from another side where we say, with Hamlet, that pleasure and pain are in the eye of the beholder, that there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And because we want to survive, we begin to understand the things that help us survive as pleasurable things. Pleasure is nothing except our acknowledgement of which things help us survive better and which don't. But this philosophy is far too simplistic to make it in the real world. The only answer I could give is that there really is no accounting for tastes. Who knows what pleasure and displeasure truly are? They are some kind of reactions in our brains, granted, but who knows why what causes a sensation of pleasure in one brain causes a sensation of pain in another? Who knows why one person thinks it good and the other person thinks it bad? Take skydiving as a case in point, or jogging, or heavy metal music, or opera. We could pick just about anything that gives pleasure to someone, couldn't we? I love peanut butter, others hate it. I love coffee, others I know would consider it cruel and unusual punishment to have to down a single cup. There's no explaining why we like what we like. Literally, there is no accounting for it. It, too, is mystery. There's so much pleasure attached to so many things that aren't necessary for survival at all, and none of us can explain intellectually why we enjoy them. The enjoyment of music, the enjoyment of nature, the enjoyment of coffee, humor and laughter. Although we find that the pleasure we take from these kinds of pleasures ends up being good for us and aiding our survival, there's nothing in the music or the laughter itself that is necessary for survival. Again, no explanations. We do see that in a very general sense, the things we need to survive tend to be pleasurable to us, but those pleasures are so complex and take so many different forms that we can't find any kind of simplistic evolutionary answer to it. Yet again, looks very much like we run into a giant mystery that we can only explain by calling it a gift. All this brings us to something that goes deeper than mere pleasure, which I'll call meaning. Pleasure is one element of beauty, but I think a far more important element is that of meaning. In fact, pleasure doesn't have to be present for there to be beauty, but meaning does. And again, with meaning and beauty, we're smack up against that old sensible question. Why? Though we may never have complete answers to our first sensible question, at least there are indications that there are answers out there if there is meaning. And the fact that beauty exists, at least in the eye, ear, and brain of the beholder, seems to me to indicate that meaning does exist. A while ago, I entered into some e-conversations with someone I've never met who believes very differently from myself. One statement in particular that he made stands out in my mind. I can't quote him, but the gist of it was that he has an easier time believing that matter is eternal and causeless, rather than a God, because he has an easier time believing in what he can see. After I thought about it for a while, I realized that I really don't have an easier time believing in what I can see. I guess that's because it's all the intangibles that make life worth living. All the things I've been talking about, music, humor, pleasure, beauty, meaning, and the big one that we're getting to, love. Not only are the unseen realities more real than the tangibles, they're the only things that lend meaning to the tangibles. It's whatever's going on in my mind, causing me to love those tangibles of clouds and crickets, that is the real reality for me. Clouds and crickets wouldn't do much for me without the intangibles. In one e-conversation, my e-friend spoke about his love for his wife, in reference, I believe, to the non-necessity of religion in life in order to be a healthy, happy, fulfilled, and moral person. It made me think, what does he mean by, I love my wife? Does he mean he has a pleasant electrochemical reaction in his brain to her? I'm sure his wife would love to hear it. Honey, you give me a pleasant electrochemical reaction. She'd be thrilled. Some would argue that it's we, ourselves, our little brains, and their electrochemical reactions that conceive concepts like love and beauty and assign them meaning. But if we want to believe that we make our own meaning, that all those beautiful and mysterious intangibles I've been talking about are simply products of the human brain, then that state of affairs is exactly the same as a completely meaningless universe. The instant we decide that we make our own meaning, we have to acknowledge that none of those things are real or have any real meaning. Is that a tolerable option for you? That beauty doesn't exist, it's a trick the brain plays on us. That love doesn't exist, it's an electrochemical reaction. That meaning doesn't exist, it's a self-created illusion. I don't think there's a one of us that can make himself believe it on an everyday, practical life experience level. We all know in our deepest gut that there are some intangibles that are realer and much bigger than the tangibles. Don't we all feel the same, that in the midst of all the vast, unattainable mysteries, to love and be loved, that is the business of life. That's what gives us and our lives their meaning. To sum up so far, here's what I'm thinking we can see about the someone out there that might lead us to suspect this someone is benevolent, aka loving. First, we have the existence of life as one piece of evidence that the someone gives a rip about us. We were designed and created, and that right fearfully and wonderfully, Psalm 139. Then there's the survival of life after its creation. Sure looks like someone wants life to survive. Then there's the existence of pleasure, which doesn't seem to be necessary for survival. Take the amoeba as a case in point. So it's just a nice bonus. Again, has all the appearance of someone caring. Then there's the existence of beauty, of which the biggest component is meaning. And then there's the subject of this chapter, love. Why existence? Why survival? Why life? Why pleasure? Why beauty? Why meaning? And especially, heading the list of the universe's greatest mysteries, why love? That's the clincher for me. Why love? Because the presence of love seems unmistakable in all these mysteries, all these intangibles that I've had to call gifts. Why would we be given all these gifts that make our lives worth living if love has no existence other than an electrochemical reaction in our brains? If love doesn't exist, why would we love? Let's peer through the telescope from a different vantage point. What does the Bible say about this Creator God it proclaims? Do we see any convergence between these two directions, the direction of our own observations of reality and the direction of what the Bible tells us about God? When I was little and squirmed my way through Sunday school every Sunday on a little wooden chair, we would memorize simple Bible verses, and one of the first ones I ever memorized was this: God is love. See 1 John 4:8. It wasn't hard to memorize. Even squirmy 3-year-olds can usually hold still long enough to handle 3 words. The words aren't big, but the concept contained in them is huge. I find it interesting that, as far as I know, this huge little concept is unique to the Bible. Of the people who are willing to believe in a God, most aren't willing to believe that God could be personal. Among those few religions or belief systems that acknowledge the concept of a personal God, I believe none adhere to the concept of an all-relational God, except the belief systems based on the Bible. The picture we're given in the Bible is one of a God whose very core and essence is relational. He not only loves, he is love. This goes against humanity's grain. Imaginatively, we seem to feel that if God is a person at all, he must be a very abstract and distant person. But remember that reality is almost always surprising. It's a better idea in the long run to try and adjust our ideas to fit reality, rather than to try and adjust reality to fit our ideas. And I would say that there's a very strong case, even from our own observations, made for the Bible being right on the subject of God and love. Let's turn the telescope inward and look at love itself to see what knowledge we might be able to glean from its nature about the someone we're intent on learning more about this chapter. As mentioned, the existence of love is one convincing evidence to me that the Bible tells us the truth, and God is love. But what about this one? How about the existence of anything? I mean, why would God choose to create anything? One of the basic Christian tenets about God is that he is self-sufficient and needs nothing. So he didn't need to create anything, so why would he? We keep running into this question, why? Why would God create us? Of course, that question sounds unanswerable. Who are we to try and read God's mind and think we could know the reasons he would decide to create? But oddly enough, I think we may have at least a partial answer to our unanswerable question contained right there in the 3 little words that give this chapter its title. If, as the Bible states, God is love, then those words must have some meaning for us. I've heard people say things to the effect of, yes, God is love, but not love like we know love. But that makes the whole thing a nonsense statement. We might as well say, God is blue, but not blue like we know blue. If the word love that the Bible uses to describe God has absolutely no corresponding meaning from our own experience, then what could the writer of that statement have meant by it, and why would it have been written to us as humans who have a human experience of love? I don't mean to say that the love that God is identical with ours. I would argue that God's love is as much greater than ours as his person is than ours. If he doesn't have emotion as we would recognize it, then it's only because what he has for emotion is so far superior to our weak experience of it that we wouldn't recognize it as emotion. Most of us without prior knowledge would not draw the connection between the unimpressive-looking seed and the beautiful flower. But if we have seeds of emotion, it's only because somewhere flowers exist. If we love, how much more does he? What in us is a drop is in God an ocean. What I'm arguing for here is that we are able to recognize the love God is because we have our own experiences of love. Our own human experiences of this gift of love are from the overflow of his nature. And as such, we can learn somewhat about his nature just by examining the overflow that pours out on us. So what do we know about the nature of love from our own experience? First, and obviously, we know that love has to have an object. Love doesn't exist unless there's someone or something to love. Love is a transitive verb. Never mind all that about transitive verbs. If you didn't learn about them in grammar, just grab hold of the fact that love demands an object. Now at this point, it could be that I've painted myself into a theological corner. Didn't I just say a few paragraphs back that God is self-sufficient and has no needs, and he didn't need to create? Yet, if his nature is love, and love must have an object, doesn't that imply that he needed to create in order to have an object for that love to pour out on? Well, that corner is got out of in a couple different ways. First, in my understanding of God, yes, he is self-sufficient. Also, he is Trinity. That's a big theological word that we don't have time to go into now, but it will come up later. Just hold on to this thought for now. The triune God has always had an object for his love built right into his very nature. See John 17, verse 24. Second, whether or not he needed to create, he did create. And because also in my understanding of him, he lives outside of time and dwells in eternity, in his mind, we've always existed, and he's always loved us. But both of those reasons for getting out of that corner are miles beyond the foundational things we need to start with, so ignore them for now if you like. Just latch on to the idea that the corner I painted myself into really wasn't much of a corner at all. So we know that love needs an object in order to be love as we know it, but not only does love as we know it have a need, love as we know it has a desire. What is it that love desires? Love needs an object, and love desires a return of love from that object. In plain English, to love means to want to be loved in return. What else do we know about love from our own experience? Love must be freely returned. Love cannot be conscripted, or it's not love. We can't force anyone to love us. We all know that. We can love and pour out our love on the one we love and hope like mad that that one gives love back to us. That's all we can do. It's the old saying that launched 1,000 posters. If you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If it doesn't, it was never meant to be. Love necessarily involves choice. If there's no choice involved, whatever we have, we wouldn't call it love. Those are things we can know about love from our own experience of it. We could go further and say that love that isn't reciprocated is intensely painful for the one who loves. But of course, in the case of true love, and does any other kind deserve to go by the name of love? We know that love doesn't depend on being returned. The one who loves truly loves no matter what, even if the only rewards are a broken heart and broken hopes. Perhaps the closest parallel we have of this kind of truly true love is the love a parent has for a child. I said earlier that the question of why God created us was unanswerable for us. Or maybe, in a way, we have the answer right under our own noses. Why do people have kids? From a dollars and cents point of view, it's the worst investment a person could make. From any purely utilitarian standpoint, there's no logical reason for it. Maybe when they're finally old enough to be useful and don't want to be anymore, you might, through great effort and bribery, manage to get a little grudging help out of them, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the energy already expended in getting them to that stage. On the list of labor-saving devices, kids don't make the top 20, nor the top 20,000. What kind of return do people get on child having and child rearing? Usually, sleepless nights and gray hairs. Yet, people go on having them, even in our enlightened age that knows how to prevent them. There must be some powerful reason people persist in this kind of behavior. It seems obvious from any standpoint, except one, the practical thing to do would be to hire someone to do whatever it is people hope to get out of having kids. Kids, kind of like grown-ups, are noisy, messy, sassy, and expensive. A hired hand would never color all over the walls in permanent marker, cut up the magazine you haven't read yet, overflow the toilet by flushing a plastic dinosaur, and then turn on you, stamp his foot, and tell you, "No, when he's told to go to bed. But on the other hand, a servant will never slip his hand into yours when you're out on a walk. A servant will never beg for a kiss and tuck in at bedtime. A servant will never curl up on your lap, throw his chubby little arms around your neck and whisper, "I love you, Mummy," or "I love you, Daddy." And somehow people go on having children, on purpose even, knowing all the risks and aggravation and sleepless nights and gray hairs and noise and mess and time and energy and dollars and cents those kids are going to cost them. Kind of makes one think that love just may be the most powerful reason there is. If we've agreed that there must be a creator, but you still can't quite buy the whole trip that God is love, then you're going to have a very hard time imagining why on earth God would want to create creatures like us. If you would like to leave love out of the picture, it will be a little like aliens who have no emotions and no offspring coming to our planet and seeing people choosing to have and raise children. It would make zero sense to them. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you leave out love. Nothing very much about our lives, period, makes sense if you leave out love. Of course, you could equally say, but it doesn't make sense that God could love us or want that kind of love from us, big as he is and small as we are. It's ridiculous, really. I can't say very much to that, except you're right, that the omnipotent and all the other omnis, creator of the universe, could desire something from us. It is a ridiculous idea, but I'm told that he does. And if I try to think out any other reason he could have made us, designed us, intricately and wonderfully, I come up dry. I don't know why he would love us. That part makes no sense, but no other part makes sense without it either. In the beginning of the Bible, Genesis 1, we're told that God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them in his image. There are many ways we can see that image in ourselves, in that we reason, feel, choose, create, but probably none more than this, in that we love. And I think he created us to love and be loved and to perpetuate our own species out of a desire to love and be loved, so that we would have some small idea about the nature of his nature. Let's recap. What can we deduce about this creator that we agreed last chapter there must be? As mentioned, he's a whole lot smarter than we are. He's a whole lot more powerful. Those points we can see not only from what the Bible says about him, which could be ruled inadmissible evidence at this point, but from what all of nature would tell us about him. But what about the Creator being loving? Do we have any practical everyday experience from our own experience that God is love? I think we do. Remember all those gifts I've kept on and on about this chapter? At the top of the list is the existence of love. How else could we explain the existence of love if it didn't come from this Creator? And second on the list is the existence of anything. If we take love out of the picture, we could stand around and scratch our heads from now till kingdom come and not be any closer to coming up with a reason why God should have bothered to create anything at all. If we put God is love back into the picture, we can at least partially understand it. We were made to love and be loved, first and foremost. But in order to be able to love, we had to be free to choose. But if God is love and created out of love, what went wrong? Can you see where I'm going with this? If not, stick around for the next chapter. We're going to tackle the bad news next.